My husband left me alone after surgery. So where was I 8 days later? Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you never imagined you would need to question their love? I did. 8 days after my surgery, my husband Daniel walked through the front door of our house as if nothing had happened. He set down his keys, looked toward the kitchen, and casually asked Rosa, our housekeeper, "Where's Claire?" Rosa stared at him. Then she said quietly, "You don't know?" Daniel frowned. "Know what?" "She hasn't been here for 8 days. For the first time, I imagine the confidence disappeared from his face. Because Daniel believed I was still at home recovering from the surgery he had abandoned me after. He thought leaving me when I was weak would make me need him. But those 8 days gave me something far more powerful. Time. Time to recover. Time to think. And time to discover what my husband had been hiding from me. So what exactly did I find? And why did I disappear without warning? Let me take you back to the day Daniel walked away from me at the hospital. When I think about those 8 days now, I realize they began the moment Daniel walked away from me at the hospital. 8 days earlier, I had just come out of surgery. I was exhausted. My body felt heavy, my thoughts were slow, and even sitting up required more effort than I wanted to admit. I remember lying there under the bright hospital lights, waiting for Daniel to come back into the room. He had promised me he would be there. Before my surgery, he had held my hand and told me, "Don't worry. I'll take you home." Those words had comforted me more than he probably realized. I believed my husband. That was my first mistake. When Daniel finally came into the room, he wasn't looking at me the way a worried husband should. He kept checking his phone. His attention was somewhere else. Then his phone rang. He stepped into the hallway. A few minutes later, he returned with a completely different expression. "I have a problem at work," he said. I stared at him. "What kind of problem?" "Something I need to handle personally." I tried to push myself higher against the pillow. "Daniel, you promised you'd take me home." "I know." His answer was flat. I swallowed and looked at him carefully. "I don't feel well enough to figure everything out by myself." Instead of coming closer, he sighed. "Claire, you're making this more difficult than it needs to be." I remember those words clearly. Not because they were loud. Because they were so cold. I had just come through surgery, and the person I expected to protect me was standing beside my hospital bed, acting as if my weakness was an inconvenience. I asked him to stay. Just for a little while. He said he couldn't. Then he picked up his coat. I watched him walk toward the door. For a few seconds, I honestly thought he would turn around. I thought he would look back at me, realize how vulnerable I was, and say, "I'm sorry. I'm staying." He never did. The door closed behind him, and I was left staring at it. I still remember the strange silence that followed. I had been married to Daniel for 7 years. I had trusted him with my home, my finances, my future, and all the ordinary little parts of my life that people don't think about until they suddenly have to manage them alone. Yet that afternoon I couldn't even count on him to take me home. Eventually I arranged transportation myself. The ride back was uncomfortable. Every turn reminded me that I was supposed to be resting, not worrying about how I would manage everything without help. When I finally reached the house, Rosa opened the door. Her face changed immediately. "Mrs. Claire." She looked behind me, then back at me. "Where's Daniel?" I forced a small smile. "He had to go back to work." Rosa didn't answer. She simply helped me inside. At the time, I didn't want to believe there was anything more to it. I told myself Daniel was stressed. Maybe his business really had a problem. Maybe I was being too sensitive because I was exhausted and hurting. I had spent years making excuses for the people I loved. That habit doesn't disappear in one afternoon. So I went to bed. I expected Daniel to come home later. Hours passed. He didn't. I checked my phone. Nothing. Then sometime that evening a message finally appeared. "Stay in bed. I'll handle everything tomorrow." I read it twice. There was no, "How are you feeling?" No, "Do you need anything?" No apology for leaving. Just those words. "I'll handle everything tomorrow." I put the phone down and stared at the ceiling. Something about that message bothered me. I couldn't explain why. Not yet. But deep inside, a question had already started forming. Why had Daniel been so eager to leave me? And why did it feel like he had been waiting for the perfect moment to do it? That question stayed with me through the night. By morning, I was still hoping I had imagined the coldness in Daniel's behavior. I wanted to believe there was a simple explanation. Maybe work really had overwhelmed him. Maybe he had panicked. Maybe he would come home, apologize, and everything would return to normal. But Daniel didn't come home. Instead, I spent the next 2 days recovering while watching my husband's excuses change. First it was a business meeting. Then it was a client who supposedly needed him. After that, he said there were financial problems at work that demanded his attention. Every explanation sounded reasonable by itself. Together they didn't make sense. I noticed something else too. Daniel barely called. When he did, his conversations were short. "How are you?" "I'm fine," I would answer. "Good. Get some rest." Then he'd hang up. I kept asking myself the same question. How could a husband leave his wife alone after surgery and barely check on her? I didn't have an answer. But Rosa seemed to. On the third morning, I found her standing quietly in the kitchen. She looked nervous when I walked in. "Rosa." She turned around quickly. "Yes, Mrs. Clare? You've been acting strange." She hesitated. "I don't want to upset you." That sentence immediately caught my attention. "Then don't protect me from the truth." Rosa looked down at the counter. "Finally," she said, "before your surgery, Mr. Daniel gave me some instructions." My stomach tightened. "What kind of instructions?" "He told me you might become emotional after the surgery." I stared at her. "Emotional?" She nodded. "He said you might ask questions about where he was. He told me not to discuss his whereabouts with you." For a moment I couldn't speak. Daniel had apparently planned for me to ask where he was before he even left me at the hospital. That was the first crack in the story I had been telling myself. I asked Rosa, "Did he say anything else?" She hesitated again. Then she quietly told me something I will never forget. "He asked me whether the guest bedroom could eventually be prepared for someone new." My heart seemed to stop. Someone new? I looked toward the hallway. The guest bedroom had been untouched for months. "Did he say who?" "No." "Did he say when?" Rosa shook her head. I didn't think much of it at the time. Neither had I. But now every detail felt different. I didn't confront Daniel. Maybe that surprised you. Maybe you would have called him immediately and demanded an explanation. But I had learned something during those first few days. When people believe they are hiding something successfully, they reveal much more than they realize. So I decided to listen. I decided to watch. That evening, Daniel finally came home. He walked into the bedroom and saw me lying there. "How are you feeling?" "Better," I said. He nodded and kissed my forehead. For the first time since the hospital, he acted like the caring husband I remembered. But something had changed inside me. I was watching him now. Not trusting him blindly. Watching. Later that night, I pretended to be asleep. Daniel quietly left the room. I heard his footsteps move down the hallway. Then I heard his voice. He was speaking on the phone. I couldn't hear everything at first, so I stayed completely still. Then one sentence reached me clearly. "She'll be gone soon. Just give me a little more time." My eyes opened. I stared into the darkness. Gone? Who was he talking about? And why did he sound so certain that I would disappear from his life? Until that moment, I had still been searching for an innocent explanation. After hearing those words, I knew there wasn't one. Daniel had not simply abandoned me at the hospital. He had been planning something before my surgery. And now I needed to find out exactly what. I lay there for several minutes after hearing Daniel say those words. "She'll be gone soon. Just give me a little more time." I kept replaying them in my mind. Who was he talking to? And who was the she he expected to be gone? I wanted to believe I had misunderstood him. But deep down I knew I hadn't. The next morning, I decided I would not confront Daniel. Not yet. If he was hiding something, I needed the truth before I gave him the chance to create another explanation. So I started paying attention to things I had ignored for months. His receipts. His schedule. His phone calls. The little details that never seemed important before suddenly mattered. One afternoon, while I was looking through household expenses, I noticed a hotel charge. Then another. Then another. There were expensive restaurant bills too. Some were nowhere near Daniel's office. I recognized one of the restaurants immediately. It was the kind of place we had talked about visiting together for years. Yet Daniel had apparently been going there without me. I felt something heavy settle in my chest. Still, I didn't know who was involved. Then I remembered an old tablet we kept in a drawer. Daniel had once used it for work and it was still connected to one of his accounts. I wasn't looking for anything when I turned it on. At least that's what I told myself. But when the messages appeared, I knew immediately that I had found something Daniel never intended me to see. There was a woman's name. Megan. I knew her. That was what hurt the most. Megan wasn't some stranger from a distant city. She had sat at our dinner table. She had smiled at me. She had visited our house. She had even checked on me before my surgery. I remember thinking she was being kind. Now I was staring at messages between her and my husband. My hands began to shake. The messages went back months. Months. While I had been living beside Daniel, trusting him, making plans with him, he had been building another relationship behind my back. I kept reading. Daniel had told Megan that our marriage was basically over. He told her I was emotionally distant. He told her he was only staying because of the house and our finances. I actually laughed when I read that. Not because anything was funny. Because I couldn't believe how easily he had rewritten our entire marriage. 7 years of my life reduced to a convenient story he could tell another woman. Then I saw a message that made my entire body go cold. Megan had asked him when I would finally leave. Daniel replied that after my surgery I would be too tired to fight anything. I read that sentence again. And again. There it was. The reason he had left me at the hospital. The reason he had seemed so impatient. The reason he had prepared Rosa for my questions. He hadn't simply been careless. He had chosen the moment when I would be at my weakest. He had believed my exhaustion would make me easier to control. For a long time I just sat there with the tablet in my hands. I thought about the hospital room. I thought about asking him to stay. I remembered watching him walk away. And suddenly the memory felt completely different. I wasn't looking at a husband who had made a terrible decision in a stressful moment. I was looking at a man who had already planned what he wanted his life to look like after I was out of the way. That was the moment something inside me changed. I stopped asking myself how I could save my marriage. Instead, I asked a much more important question. How much of my life had Daniel been quietly taking from me while I was busy believing he loved me? I closed the tablet. I didn't call him. I didn't scream. I didn't tell Megan that I knew. I simply sat there and made myself one promise. Daniel would not get another chance to prepare for my reaction. If he had spent months planning behind my back, then I could take my time too. And this time I would be prepared. That promise changed the way I looked at everything. I no longer saw Daniel's lies as isolated incidents. The hotel charges, the secret messages, the strange conversations with Rosa, and the way he had abandoned me after surgery were all pieces of the same picture. But I still didn't know how far it went. So I called Rachel. Rachel had been my attorney for years, and I trusted her because she had never treated me like I was incapable of making my own decisions. When she answered, I didn't tell her everything immediately. I simply said, I need your help with something private. She could hear the seriousness in my voice. We arranged to meet. I showed her the messages between Daniel and Megan. I showed her the financial records. I told her what Rosa had revealed. And finally, I told her exactly what Daniel had said on the phone. Rachel listened without interrupting. When I finished, she looked at me and said, Claire, don't confront him yet. I wasn't planning to. Good, she said. Document everything. And don't make decisions while you're angry. I almost smiled. I've never felt less interested in being angry. What I felt wasn't rage anymore. It was clarity. Rachel helped me review our finances carefully. That's when I discovered something I hadn't expected. Daniel had been using our joint money for Megan. Hotels, restaurants, travel, expensive purchases. Some of the charges had been disguised as business expenses. I stared at the records. How long has this been happening? Rachel pointed to the dates. Longer than you thought. I felt sick. Not because of the money itself. Because every dollar represented a choice. Every dinner. Every hotel room. Every purchase. While I had been trusting him, he had been using money connected to our household to build a future with someone else. Then Rachel found something even more important. Daniel had apparently been preparing for a divorce financially. There were notes and documents suggesting that he expected me to walk away from certain assets while he kept control of the house and much of the money. He seemed to believe that because he managed certain parts of our finances, those things automatically belonged to him. But they didn't. Rachel explained that some of my assets had been mine before the marriage. They were separate from the property Daniel assumed he could claim. I looked at her. So he thinks he controls things he doesn't actually own? Rachel nodded. That's what it appears. For the first time in days I felt something close to relief. Daniel had spent months planning what he believed would happen to me. He had assumed I would be too emotional, too tired, or too trusting to challenge him. But he had made one enormous mistake. He had underestimated me. I didn't need to destroy Daniel. I didn't need to embarrass him. I didn't need to make his life miserable. I simply needed to stop allowing him to benefit from mine. So I followed Rachel's advice. Quietly, I began separating what was legally mine. I secured important documents. I reviewed accounts. I made copies of financial records. I kept every message and receipt. And I said nothing to Daniel. At home, I continued acting like the recovering wife he expected to see. If he asked how I was feeling, I told him I was getting better. If he asked whether I needed anything, I said no. He never suspected what was happening behind those simple answers. Meanwhile, he continued talking to Megan. He believed his plan was moving forward. He believed I had no idea. And perhaps the strangest part was this. For the first time in 7 years, I wasn't trying to protect Daniel from the consequences of his choices. I was protecting myself. The woman he thought would quietly accept whatever he decided was disappearing. And I was about to make my exit without giving him a warning. By the time I understood what Daniel had been planning, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to announce my next move. For 7 years, I had been the person who explained, forgave, adjusted, and made things easier for everyone around me. I wasn't going to do that anymore. Rachel helped me make a careful plan. Nothing dramatic. Nothing reckless. Just a quiet exit. Because I was still recovering from surgery, I needed somewhere peaceful to stay. Rachel helped me arrange a temporary place where I could rest without Daniel knowing exactly where I was. I packed slowly. I didn't take things that belonged to Daniel. I didn't empty the house. I didn't want a confrontation. I took the belongings that were clearly mine, along with the documents and personal items I needed. Every time I placed something into a bag, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. There were photographs, books, a few pieces of jewelry. Small things that had once represented a life I thought would last forever. But I wasn't packing to punish Daniel. I was packing because I finally understood that I couldn't recover properly while living inside a marriage that had already become a lie. Rachel also helped me protect my finances and organize the paperwork for the divorce. The strange part was how normal everything looked from Daniel's perspective. He came home. He walked through the house. He asked whether I was resting. And he had absolutely no idea that I was preparing to leave. One evening, he stood in the doorway and said, "You seem better." "I am," I answered. He smiled. "That's good." Then his phone buzzed. He looked at it and quickly turned the screen away from me. I didn't need to ask who it was. I already knew. Later, I saw another message from Megan. They were still discussing their future. Still making plans. Still talking as if I were simply an obstacle between them and the life they wanted. I stared at the screen for a moment. And surprisingly, I didn't cry. I just felt tired. I realized Daniel wasn't worried about whether his wife was recovering. He was worried about whether his plans were working. That realization hurt more than the affair itself. Before I left, I went to find Rosa. She was in the kitchen folding towels. "Rosa," I said softly. She looked at me. "You're leaving." It wasn't a question. I nodded. She immediately looked worried. "Where will you go?" "I'll be safe." She came closer. "Does Mr. Daniel know?" "No." Rosa looked down. I could tell she felt caught between us. So I reached for her hand. "I'm not asking you to lie for me." She looked at me. "If he asks where I am, tell him the truth about what happened. But please don't help him find me." Rosa nodded. "I understand." I thanked her. That night I packed the last of my things. I stood in the bedroom for a long time. This room had held 7 years of my life. There had been laughter here. Arguments. Quiet mornings. Plans for the future. And now there was only a strange emptiness. I looked around one final time. Then I walked out. No note. No argument. No dramatic goodbye. I simply closed the door behind me. Daniel still believed I was at home recovering. He didn't know that the woman he thought he could control had already walked away. And for the first time since the surgery, I felt like I could finally breathe. For the first time in 7 years, I left my own house without telling Daniel where I was going. I didn't know exactly what would happen next. But I knew I needed distance. I needed time to heal without hearing another excuse. seeing another hidden message, or wondering whether my husband was coming home. And while I was quietly rebuilding my life somewhere else, Daniel continued living inside the story he had created for himself. He thought I was still at home. He thought I was recovering in the bedroom. He thought I would eventually come back to him because, in his mind, I had nowhere else to go. He was wrong. It was the 8th day when he finally discovered the truth. I wasn't there to see his face, but Rosa later told me exactly what happened. Daniel walked into the house that morning like any other day. He put his keys down, walked into the kitchen and saw Rosa. "Where's Claire?" he asked casually. Rosa looked at him. She didn't answer immediately. Daniel frowned. "Rosa." Then she said, "You don't know?" His expression changed. "Know what?" Rosa took a breath. "She hasn't been here for 8 days. Daniel apparently stared at her as if she had spoken another language. "That's impossible." But it wasn't. He hurried upstairs. The bedroom was empty. My closet was noticeably different. The things I had taken were gone. He checked my office. The important documents I had secured were missing. He looked through the house again, probably expecting to find some explanation that would make everything feel normal. There wasn't one. Then his phone rang. It was me. I had been expecting the call. "Where are you?" Daniel demanded the moment I answered. His voice wasn't worried. It was angry. I stayed calm. "I'm safe." "Where?" "You don't need to know." "What do you mean I don't need to know?" "You're my wife." I closed my eyes. Those words would have broken my heart a week earlier. Now they sounded almost absurd. "You left me at the hospital, Daniel." There was silence. "You remember that, don't you?" "I had a work emergency." "You had an excuse." "I told you I was sorry." "No," I said quietly. "You told me to stay in bed." He became defensive. "Claire, what is this about?" I could have told him everything. I could have told him about Megan. I could have told him about the messages. I could have told him that Rachel had already reviewed the finances. But I didn't. Not over the phone. Not while he was still trying to understand how he had lost control of the situation. Instead I said, "You left me when I needed you. I don't understand why you're surprised that I learned how to live without you." He went quiet. Then his voice changed. "What do you know?" There was. That question told me more than any confession could have. He wasn't asking whether I was okay. He wasn't asking whether I needed help. He was asking what I knew. I looked out the window of the place where I was staying. "I think you already know the answer." "Claire, please. Come home. We can talk about this." "No. Don't do this." I almost laughed. "Do what?" "Disappear." I paused. "You made plans for a life without me, Daniel. I simply stopped waiting for you to make room for me in it." He started talking faster. He wanted explanations. He wanted to know where I was. He wanted me to come home. But I wasn't going to argue. I had spent enough time explaining myself to someone who had already decided what he wanted. So I gave him one final sentence. "Rachel will contact your attorney." Silence. Then I ended the call. I sat there holding my phone, my hands surprisingly steady. For 8 days, Daniel had believed he was the one controlling what happened next. He had no idea that while he was planning my future without me, I had quietly taken back control of my own. And now he was finally going to hear everything he had been so desperate to hide. The moment I ended that call, I knew there was no going back. For 8 days, Daniel had assumed I was too weak to challenge him. Now he knew I had left. But he still didn't know how much I knew. Rachel contacted Daniel's attorney the next morning, and within days we arranged a meeting. I remember walking into that room beside Rachel. Daniel was already there. He looked different. Not physically. It was the expression on his face. For the first time I could see uncertainty. He had probably expected me to arrive crying. Maybe he thought I would accuse him, raise my voice, demand answers, and eventually give him an opportunity to apologize. Instead I sat down quietly. Daniel looked at me. "Claire, can we just talk?" I nodded. "Go ahead." He took a breath. "I know I handled the hospital situation badly." Badly. That word almost made me smile. But I said nothing. He continued. "I was under incredible pressure. My business was struggling and I panicked." I looked at him. "Is that what you want me to believe?" He shifted in his chair. "I made mistakes." Then came the next explanation. He claimed Megan wasn't important. He said their relationship had been misunderstood. He told me he had been lonely. He even suggested that our marriage had been emotionally over long before he ever became involved with her. I listened. I didn't interrupt him. Because I wanted him to hear himself. I wanted him to understand that I wasn't there to fight over every sentence. When he finally stopped talking, Rachel opened her folder. "You can stop explaining," she said. Daniel looked at her. Rachel began presenting the evidence. The messages between Daniel and Megan. The hotel charges. The restaurant bills. The purchases made with money connected to our household. The conversations about living together. And then she showed him the message about my surgery. The message where Daniel had told Megan I would be too tired to fight anything after the operation. Daniel's face changed. I watched him stare at the evidence. He didn't deny it. Not immediately. Instead he looked at me. "Claire." I said nothing. He lowered his voice. "I didn't mean it like that." I finally answered. "How did you mean it?" He couldn't explain. Rachel continued. She explained which assets were legally mine and which assumptions Daniel had made about our finances were incorrect. Daniel had apparently believed that because he had access to certain accounts and documents he controlled everything. He didn't. Then another problem appeared. Megan had started calling him. She had apparently learned that Daniel had not been completely honest with her either. He had told her our financial situation was different. He had made promises about how quickly the marriage would end. He had given her a picture of a future that was never as certain as he claimed. Daniel's phone kept lighting up. He ignored it. Then it rang again. I looked at him. For years, I had wondered whether there was something wrong with me whenever Daniel pulled away. Now I understood. He had been telling different versions of the truth to different people. He had built his life around whatever story benefited him at that moment. And eventually those stories collided. Daniel looked at me. "Claire, please." I shook my head. "You're asking me to understand why you betrayed me." "No. I'm asking you to remember everything we've been through." "I remember." My voice was calm. "I remember the good years. I remember the difficult ones. I remember standing beside you when things weren't easy." He looked down. "But I also remember the hospital." He didn't respond. I continued. "The surgery didn't make me leave you, Daniel." He slowly looked up. "It showed me who you were when I was helpless." That sentence changed the room. For once he didn't have an answer. I didn't need one. I wasn't there to punish him. I was there because I had finally stopped protecting him from the consequences of his own choices. And Daniel was beginning to understand something that terrified him. I wasn't angry enough to come back. I was simply finished. After that meeting, something inside me finally became quiet. For months I had been carrying questions. Why did Daniel change? Why did he leave me at the hospital? How long had he been lying? Was any part of our marriage real? I still didn't have every answer. But I no longer needed them. The divorce process moved forward. Daniel's attorney reviewed the financial records, and the assumptions he had built his plans around began falling apart. Some of the assets he believed he would keep were not his to claim. The money he had spent on Megan became part of the financial accounting. The expenses he had tried to hide were no longer hidden. And the more everything was examined, the clearer the picture became. Daniel had spent months preparing for a future where he believed I would simply step aside. He hadn't prepared for me to know the truth. He hadn't prepared for me to have an attorney. And most importantly, he hadn't prepared for me to stop being afraid of losing him. His business also began suffering from the consequences of his own decisions. The financial problems he had once used as an excuse for abandoning me were now becoming real problems he had to face. I didn't cause them. I didn't interfere. I didn't make a single phone call to hurt him. I simply stopped covering for him. Megan eventually walked away too. Daniel had promised her that everything would be simple. It wasn't. She discovered that the man who had told her one version of his marriage had been telling me another. One evening Daniel called me. His voice was quieter than usual. "Claire, can we try again?" I was silent for a moment. "Try what?" "Us." I looked around my new home. For the first time it actually felt like mine. "I don't think there's an us left to try." He sighed. "People make mistakes." I closed my eyes. "Yes, they do. So you can forgive me." "I can forgive you without going back to you." He didn't answer. Then he said something that surprised me. "I never thought you'd really leave." That sentence stayed with me, because it explained everything. Daniel hadn't respected my boundaries because he believed I would always stay. He believed my loyalty meant I had no limit. He was wrong. I told him, an affair wasn't one mistake, Daniel. He was quiet. It was hundreds of decisions, I continued. You had so many chances to stop. You chose not to. I didn't say it angrily. I didn't need to. That was the difference between the woman who had left the hospital 8 days earlier and the woman speaking to him now. I no longer needed Daniel to understand my pain. I needed to understand my own worth. My recovery took time. Some mornings were difficult. There were days when I missed the familiar routine of my old life. There were moments when I wondered whether I had made the right decision. But each day I became stronger. I started accepting help from people who genuinely cared about me. I spent time with friends I had neglected while trying to keep my marriage together. I made simple plans again. Coffee with a friend. A quiet afternoon at home. A walk when I felt strong enough. Little things. They didn't look important from the outside. But to me they were proof that my life was becoming mine again. Daniel had expected my revenge to be dramatic. He probably imagined anger, accusations, and destruction. But my revenge was much simpler. I stopped saving him. I stopped making excuses for him. I stopped protecting him from consequences he had created himself. And I stopped measuring my happiness by whether he was unhappy. That was when I realized I had already won something far more valuable than revenge. I had gotten myself back. When I look back at those 8 days, I realized the surgery wasn't the hardest part. It was discovering that the person I trusted most could choose convenience when I was at my most vulnerable. But those 8 days also gave me something I desperately needed. Clarity. I stopped asking why Daniel didn't choose me and started choosing myself. If you've ever had someone walk away when you needed them most, I hope my story reminds you that their choice doesn't determine your worth. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and stay with us for more powerful stories. And tell me in the comments, would you have done what I did?